I thought I had a good marriage. My wife, Hannah, and I had been together for 6 years, married for 3. We didn't have kids, something we both agreed on early in the relationship, and for the most part, I believed our lives were happy. Sure, there were the usual ups and downs, but who doesn't have those? Hannah worked as a graphic designer, which meant she often had late nights finishing up projects. I had a 9-to-5 job in finance, so our schedules didn't always align. To make up for it, we would plan date nights or little weekend getaways. Lately, though, those had become fewer and far between. She always seemed tired or distracted. I chalked it up to stress from her work. About 6 months ago, she started taking a lot of Ubers instead of driving. It was odd, considering we owned a car. When I asked her about it, she waved me off, saying it was easier than finding parking downtown. She mentioned she'd found a reliable driver she could request through the app. She even laughed once, saying, "It's almost like having a personal chauffeur." I didn't think much of it. Why would I? Then the trips started getting more frequent. Grocery store runs, visits to her friend's house, even the gym, all done with her trusty Uber driver. His name came up occasionally, David. "David's so funny. He plays the best music." Or "David helped me carry the groceries up today." I thought she was just being friendly. I mean, it's not weird to talk about a regular driver, right? But looking back now, there were signs I missed. Little things. The way she smiled at her phone when she got a notification. The sudden need to run errands at odd hours. The increasing excuses to stay out late because the girls and I just needed a night out. Then one Saturday, she came home smelling like cologne. Not mine. I made a joke about it. Something dumb, like, "Wow, do I need to start wearing cologne like that?" She laughed too loudly and dismissed it, saying, "Oh, it must have rubbed off on me in the Uber." Even then, I didn't suspect anything. That's how much I trusted her. But things escalated. The excuses became more elaborate, the distance between us more pronounced. And still, I didn't see it for what it was. Not until much later. It started unraveling on a cold Friday night. Hannah had mentioned earlier in the week that she was meeting her friends for drinks after work. I didn't think twice about it. This was routine for her. I kissed her goodbye as she left, dressed in a tight black dress I hadn't seen her wear in years. She looked incredible. I even joked, "Your friends are going to hate you for outshining them." She gave me a smirk and said, "Don't wait up." I didn't. I stayed in, ordered pizza, and mindlessly scrolled through Netflix. Around midnight, I realized she hadn't texted. I sent her a quick message asking if she needed a ride home. No response. 2 hours later, I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. I wasn't the suspicious type, at least, I wasn't before that night. But something gnawed at me. A nagging feeling in my gut that I couldn't shake. I opened the Uber app, the one linked to her account on our shared phone plan. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I just wanted to see if she'd gotten a ride home yet. And there it was. The most recent ride wasn't to the bar she said she was going to. It was to a nearby park. A secluded spot I knew well, often frequented by couples who wanted privacy. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. I tried calling her again. Voicemail. I should have gone to bed, told myself I was being paranoid. But instead, I grabbed my car keys and drove. The park was nearly empty, save for a single car parked under the shadow of a tall oak tree. My heart pounded as I crept closer. It was an Uber, David's car. I recognized it from the photo on her app. I should have turned around. I should have driven home and given myself time to think. But curiosity, anger, and sheer disbelief propelled me forward. Through the fogged-up windows, I saw movement. The silhouettes of 2 people in the back seat. Her familiar laugh broke the quiet night air, followed by the unmistakable sounds of moaning. My stomach dropped, and my legs felt like lead as I walked closer. I could see her now. Hannah, her head thrown back, her hands gripping his shoulders as they moved together. My wife, in another man's arms, in his car. I stood there, frozen, as if time itself had stopped. Then, Unable to contain the boiling rage and heartbreak inside me, I knocked on the window. Hard. The scene inside froze. Hannah's head whipped around, her face going from shock to horror. David scrambled to adjust himself, stammering something I couldn't hear through the glass. She opened the door, half-dressed, and shouted, "What the hell are you doing here?" "What am I doing here?" I echoed, my voice shaking. "What the hell are you doing here, Hannah?" She started fumbling for words. "It's not what it looks like. Don't." I cut her off, my voice rising. "Don't insult my intelligence." Her expression shifted instantly. She wasn't apologetic. She was angry. "You had no right to follow me. This is an invasion of privacy." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Privacy? You're screwing another man in a goddamn Uber, and you're talking to me about privacy? David, the spineless idiot, tried to interject. "Look, man, this isn't her fault. Shut up." I snapped, glaring at him. "You're the least of my concerns right now." Hannah stepped out of the car, fully hysterical. "Oh, so what? You're perfect? You work all the time, barely pay attention to me, and I'm just supposed to sit at home like some Stepford wife? Are you serious right now?" I was yelling now, but I didn't care. "You think this is my fault?" She crossed her arms, defiant even now. "Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have had to find someone else." I felt the wind get knocked out of me. My chest tightened, and I couldn't breathe. "We're done," I said, my voice low and cold. "I'll pack your things tomorrow. Don't bother coming home." She tried to protest, but I didn't wait to hear more. I turned, got in my car, and drove away, leaving her standing in the glow of David's headlights. That night, I lay awake in bed, the image of her in his arms seared into my mind. I knew then that my marriage was over, and for the first time, I felt the weight of betrayal crush me entirely. The morning after was surreal. I woke up in a daze, unsure if the events of the previous night had been a nightmare or my new reality. The empty side of the bed confirmed it. She hadn't come home. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my cold coffee, replaying every moment in my mind. The lies, the laughter, the smell of another man's cologne on her. My phone buzzed. It was her. Texts flooded in one after another. "Please, let's talk. You're blowing this out of proportion. It didn't mean anything. I'm sorry. It was a mistake." I ignored every single one. By mid-morning, I started packing her things. Every dress, every pair of shoes, every little trinket she'd scattered throughout the house went into a box. Our wedding photos? Into the trash. The framed photo from our honeymoon? Smashed. It was cathartic, but it didn't make the pain go away. I called a lawyer. I didn't want to wait. The sooner I filed for divorce, the sooner I could reclaim my life. By the afternoon, Hannah showed up at the house. I heard her car pull into the driveway and immediately tensed. She banged on the door. "Open up," she yelled. "We need to talk." I opened the door, but only a crack. "There's nothing to talk about." "Don't be like this," she pleaded, her voice teetering between desperation and irritation. "We can work through this." I laughed bitterly. "Work through what, Hannah? You screwing David in his car? Or the months of lying to my face?" Her face hardened. "Oh, come on. Like you've never made mistakes?" Mistakes? She was equating her blatant betrayal to a mistake? My blood boiled. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. This is deliberate. Her tone shifted again, from defensive to dismissive. "Fine. If you're going to act like this, maybe I don't want to fix things." I shook my head, laughing in disbelief. "You know what, Hannah? Good. Because I don't want to fix things either. Your stuff is packed. It's on the porch. Take it and go." She pushed the door open wider, stepping inside. "You're not throwing me out of my own house." "My house," I corrected. "Your name's not on the deed. And don't worry, I've already filed for divorce." That hit her like a slap. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. "You're really doing this?" Did you think I wouldn't? I asked. You destroyed everything. Her face twisted into something ugly. You're such a pathetic loser. You know that? No wonder I had to find someone else. The words stung, but I didn't let it show. Keep telling yourself that if it helps you sleep at night. She stormed out, grabbing the boxes on the porch and shoving them into her car. Before driving off, she rolled down the window. You'll regret this. The tires screeched as she sped away. The house felt eerily quiet after she left. I stood in the living room, staring at the empty walls where our photos used to hang. It hit me then how much I had built my life around her, only to have it all come crashing down. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something else, clarity. I wasn't the one who ruined our marriage. I wasn't the one who lied, cheated, or blamed someone else for my mistakes. She had broken us, and I was done picking up the pieces. The next few days felt like walking through a war zone, with the remnants of my life scattered around me. I returned to work, but my mind wasn't there. My colleagues noticed. Everything okay? They'd ask with cautious concern. I lied and said I was fine. How could I explain that my wife had just blown up our marriage for a fling with her Uber driver? Hannah, on the other hand, was relentless. My phone buzzed constantly with her calls and texts. Apologies, excuses, and, when those didn't work, insults. I stopped reading them. I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to deal with her manipulation. Then came the bombshell. One evening, as I was sorting through paperwork for the divorce, I received a message from an unknown number. It was David, the driver, my wife's lover, the man who destroyed my life. The message read, I'm really sorry about what happened. I didn't know she was married at first. I feel terrible. Can we talk? I stared at the screen, dumbfounded. What was he expecting? Forgiveness? A heart-to-heart over coffee? Against my better judgment, I replied, What do you want? He responded almost immediately. I just want to explain. Please, man, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I ignored him. What could he possibly say that would make this better? That it was an accident? That he hadn't planned to sleep with another man's wife? A few minutes later, another message came through. She told me you were boring, that you didn't love her anymore. I believed her. I see now that I was wrong. I threw my phone across the room, the screen cracking as it hit the wall. The audacity of both of them, her spinning lies about our relationship and him thinking he could justify his actions, was infuriating. The next day, Hannah called again. This time, I answered. What do you want, Hannah? I said, my voice cold and detached. You need to stop ignoring me, she snapped. We need to talk about the divorce. There's nothing to talk about, I replied. The lawyer will handle it. She hesitated for a moment, then said, You're making this harder than it needs to be. I laughed bitterly. Harder? You cheated on me, Hannah. You lied to me. You humiliated me. And now you want to talk about hard? She shifted tactics, her voice softening. I'm sorry, okay? I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking straight. You were thinking straight enough to hide it for months, I shot back. You don't accidentally end up having sex in someone's car. She didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice was venomous. Fine. You want to play the victim? Go ahead. But don't forget, you weren't perfect either. And there it was. The final nail in the coffin of my love for her. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. She was just angry that she had been caught. I hung up. That night, I sat in the quiet of my house and let myself grieve. Not for her, but for the life I thought we had. For the trust I'd given so freely. For the future I'd envisioned that would now never come to be. But amidst the grief, there was something else. A spark of hope. A realization that I was free. Free from her lies, her selfishness, her manipulations. I didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in weeks, I felt ready to face it. In the days following that final phone call, I threw myself into the divorce process. It was brutal, dividing assets, untangling finances, and deciding who got what. But it was also strangely therapeutic. Each form I signed, each piece of paper I filed, felt like I was reclaiming a piece of myself. Hannah, of course, wasn't making it easy. She contested nearly everything. The house? She wanted it. My car? Suddenly, she claimed it was shared property. Even items as insignificant as a coffee maker became battlegrounds. It was infuriating, but also predictable. If she couldn't manipulate me emotionally, she tried to control me through the legal system. Then came the wild twist. One evening, while I was finishing up a call with my lawyer, I got an unexpected knock on the door. Standing there, fidgeting nervously, was David. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him, incredulous. "Look, man," he said, his voice shaky. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I need to talk to you." "Leave," I said flatly, starting to shut the door. "Wait," he pleaded, sticking his foot in the doorway. "It's about Hannah." That stopped me. Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider. "You have 5 minutes." He stepped inside, looking every bit as uncomfortable as I felt. He fumbled with his words for a moment before blurting out, "She's been lying to me too." I folded my arms, skeptical. "Go on." "She told me you two were separated," he said, "that your marriage was over, but you were dragging your feet on the paperwork. I swear, if I'd known the truth, I never would have." He trailed off, realizing there was no way to justify what he'd done. I wanted to kick him out right then and there, but curiosity got the better of me. "And now?" "She's been calling me nonstop, trying to convince me to stay with her," he said, shaking his head. "But I can't. She's toxic, man. She lied about everything." I couldn't help but laugh, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. "You're just figuring that out now?" He looked down, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, man. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I thought you should know." "You're right," I said. "I don't forgive you. But thanks for the confirmation that I'm better off without her." He nodded, muttered another apology, and left. That night, I sat in silence, processing everything. It was bizarre, almost surreal, to hear David admit he'd been played just as much as I had. For the first time, I realized that Hannah's betrayal wasn't just a reflection of her feelings toward me. It was a reflection of her selfishness, her inability to take responsibility, her insatiable need for attention. I thought that would make me feel better, but instead, it just made me sad. Not for her, but for the time I'd wasted on someone who didn't deserve it. Still, there was a small victory in all this. I was free. She had no more power over me, no more lies to tell, no more strings to pull. I could finally see a future without her, and for the first time, it didn't seem so daunting. It seemed possible. A few weeks after David's visit, things took a darker turn. I thought that once the divorce papers were filed and the process was in motion, Hannah would move on. But instead, she doubled down. She went from bitter to outright vindictive. It started with her showing up at my workplace unannounced. I was in the middle of a meeting when the receptionist called to tell me my wife was waiting in the lobby. I felt a surge of anger. She had no reason to be there, and we both knew it. I stepped out to meet her, keeping my tone clipped and professional. "What are you doing here, Hannah?" "I just wanted to talk," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "You've been ignoring my texts." "Because there's nothing left to say," I replied. "This isn't the time or place." She crossed her arms, her expression shifting from sweet to venomous in an instant. "So this is who you are now? Cold and heartless?" I sighed, exasperated. "If you don't leave, I'll have security escort you out." Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she stormed off, muttering under her breath. The receptionist gave me a knowing look as I walked back to my office. But that was just the beginning. A few days later, I started hearing from mutual friends. Hannah was spreading rumors, wild, ridiculous lies. She told people I had cheated on her, that I was emotionally abusive, that I'd driven her into David's arms. Some friends confronted me directly, while others simply stopped returning my calls. It was like she was trying to isolate me, to ruin what little stability I had left. I didn't engage. I wanted to, desperately. I wanted to call her out, to set the record straight. But my lawyer's advice was clear. Keep your head down and let the evidence speak for itself. Then, the final straw. I came home one night to find my car vandalized. The tires were slashed, the windshield cracked, and the word liar was spray-painted across the hood. I stared at the mess, my hands trembling with rage. I didn't have proof that Hannah was behind it, but I didn't need it. This had her written all over it. I filed a police report, but without evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Still, it was a wake-up call. I realized that as long as I was tethered to her through this divorce, I would never truly be free. I started documenting everything, every text, every phone call, every interaction. I changed the locks on the house and installed security cameras. I stopped responding to her entirely, funneling all communication through my lawyer. It was exhausting, but I refused to let her drag me down any further. Amidst the chaos, though, there were moments of light. Old friends reached out, offering support. My family, who had been distant during my marriage, rallied around me. And for the first time in years, I started to feel like myself again. But Hannah wasn't done yet. The real storm was still coming. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. The lies, the vandalism, the harassment. It all felt like the peak of Hannah's spite. But I was wrong. That was just the prelude. The storm came when Hannah decided to fight dirty. One morning, I woke up to a slew of messages from mutual friends. Screenshots of social media posts. Photos. Stories. She had taken our private life, twisted it into some sordid soap opera, and plastered it all over the internet. In her posts, she painted herself as the victim. She claimed I was controlling, unfaithful, and that my coldness had pushed her into David's arms. She wrote about how she had no choice but to find comfort elsewhere. The comments were a mix of support from her circle and outrage from mine. I was furious. She was trying to ruin my reputation, to destroy what little dignity I had left. My lawyer immediately sent a cease and desist letter, but the damage was already done. I couldn't stop people from believing her lies. The worst part? She posted private photos of us. Old ones from our vacations, our honeymoon. Pictures that showed me at my most vulnerable. There was nothing explicit, but the captions she added turned them into something humiliating. I wanted to retaliate, to post my own side of the story. But my lawyer and close friends talked me down. Don't stoop to her level, they said. She'll bury herself. And they were right. A week later, I got a call from David. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She's unhinged, man, he said, his voice trembling. She's been calling me nonstop, showing up at my work, threatening to ruin my life if I don't get back with her. I laughed bitterly. Welcome to my world. I didn't know she was like this, he admitted. I thought she was. Don't, I interrupted. Don't try to justify it. You knew she was married. You chose this. He went silent for a moment, then sighed. Fair enough. But I thought you should know. She's falling apart. As much as I hated to admit it, hearing that brought me some small satisfaction. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because it meant I wasn't the only one who saw through her lies. David wasn't the only one who noticed her unraveling. Mutual friends started reaching out to apologize. They had seen her posts, heard her stories, and started to realize the truth. One friend said, "She's digging her own grave, man. Just wait it out." And that's what I did. I kept my head down, focused on work, and let the storm rage on. A few weeks later, the tide started to turn. Hannah's social media rants grew more erratic. She contradicted herself, lashed out at her own friends, and eventually deleted her accounts. It was like watching a house of cards collapse. But while she was losing the battle publicly, the legal fight was far from over. She contested the divorce, claiming emotional distress and demanding a larger share of our assets. My lawyer assured me we had a strong case, but it was draining, emotionally, financially, and mentally. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I walked into the courtroom feeling like I was about to face a firing squad. Hannah sat at her table, her eyes red and swollen. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal. She had made her choices, and now she had to face the consequences. The hearing dragged on for hours, each side presenting their case. My lawyer was relentless, laying out the evidence of her infidelity, her harassment, and her public smear campaign. Hannah's lawyer tried to paint her as a wronged wife, but it didn't hold up under scrutiny. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. The house was mine, the assets were divided fairly, and the divorce was finalized. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I was free. But freedom came with its own challenges. The battle was over, but the scars remained. And as I stood outside the courthouse, I realized that the hardest part was still ahead, rebuilding my life. The courtroom victory felt hollow as I returned to my now quiet, empty house. Winning didn't erase the betrayal, the humiliation, or the ache of what I'd lost. The house felt different now, less of a home and more of a reminder of what had crumbled within its walls. I tried to distract myself by diving into work. Late nights at the office, extra projects, anything to keep my mind off the past few months. But grief doesn't wait. It finds you in the quiet moments, when you wake up in the middle of the night, reaching out for someone who isn't there. When you walk past her favorite coffee shop and instinctively glance inside. The messages from Hannah had finally stopped. My lawyer ensured the judge's orders included a restraining order to prevent further harassment. It was a relief not to hear from her, but the silence was heavy. For 6 years, my life had been intertwined with hers, and now there was just nothing. That emptiness began to fill with questions I didn't want to face. Had I been blind to her flaws? Was I too trusting? Could I have done anything differently? Those questions felt like poison, and yet I couldn't stop drinking them. But life, as it often does, had a way of nudging me forward. One evening, as I was grocery shopping, I ran into an old friend from college, Sarah. We hadn't seen each other in years, but the recognition was instant. She smiled warmly, her cart already full of an assortment of items, and we started chatting. "Wow, it's been forever," she said. "How's life treating you?" The question caught me off guard. I considered giving her the usual good, busy with work answer, but something about her genuine curiosity made me pause. "It's complicated," I admitted. She raised an eyebrow, her smile softening. "Want to grab a coffee and talk about it?" And just like that, I found myself sitting in a corner cafe, pouring out the story of my imploded marriage. Sarah listened without judgment, occasionally shaking her head or muttering, "What the hell?" under her breath. When I finished, she said, "That's a lot. I'm so sorry you had to go through all of that." "Yeah," I said, stirring my coffee. "But it's over now. I just don't know what comes next." She tilted her head, considering me for a moment. "Maybe it's time to figure out what you want. You've spent so much energy on her, on reacting to her, cleaning up after her, surviving her. What do you want your life to look like now?" Her words stuck with me long after we said goodbye. I realized she was right. For years, I'd been so focused on Hannah, her needs, her whims, her betrayals, that I'd forgotten about myself. Who was I, apart from her? The next few weeks became a journey of rediscovery. I started reconnecting with old friends, picking up hobbies I'd abandoned during my marriage, and even trying new things. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always been curious about but never had the time for. I started running again, clearing my head on long, solitary jogs. Piece by piece, I began rebuilding. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments when the grief hit like a tidal wave. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could carve out a new life for myself. And amidst all of this, Sarah became a surprising source of support. We started meeting for coffee regularly, sharing stories about our lives and laughing over the absurdities of the world. There was no pressure, no expectations, just the simple comfort of reconnecting with someone who understood me. The scars of my marriage weren't gone, and I wasn't naive enough to think they ever would be. But for the first time, they felt less like wounds and more like reminders of what I'd survived. And as I stood on the cusp of this new chapter, I realized that maybe freedom wasn't just about leaving the past behind. Maybe it was about finding the courage to build something better in its place. The weeks turned into months, and my life began to settle into a new rhythm. It wasn't easy. Some days, the loneliness crept back in, and the memories of Hannah's betrayal felt as sharp as ever. But other days, I caught myself smiling at something silly a coworker said, at the way sunlight streamed through my living room window, or at the sheer fact that I had made it through the worst of it. My regular coffee meetups with Sarah became a highlight of my week. She had a knack for making me laugh, for helping me see the absurdity in situations I'd otherwise dwell on. Over time, I realized that I looked forward to those moments, not just as a distraction but as a genuine source of joy. Then, out of nowhere, Hannah resurfaced. One evening, I returned home from a long day at work to find a handwritten letter in my mailbox. It was from her. For a moment, I debated tossing it into the trash without opening it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a rambling, disjointed apology. She admitted to lying, cheating, and lashing out at me during the divorce. She said she had been seeing a therapist and was trying to work on herself. She claimed she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted me to know that she regretted everything. I stared at the letter, a whirlwind of emotions churning inside me. Part of me felt vindicated, like I had finally been acknowledged as the wronged party. Another part of me felt nothing at all, like the words couldn't touch the scar tissue she'd left behind. That night, I called Sarah. When I told her about the letter, she didn't hesitate. "Burn it," she said with a laugh, "or frame it as a reminder of what you've survived." "I don't know," I said. "It's weird. I thought hearing her admit it would give me some kind of closure, but I just feel tired." "Closure isn't something they give you," Sarah said gently. "It's something you decide for yourself." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I'd been waiting for an apology, for some sign that Hannah recognized the pain she'd caused. But now that I had it, I realized it didn't change anything. It didn't erase the past or make up for the months of hell she put me through. The next morning, I shredded the letter and moved on with my day. The real closure came a few weeks later, in the most unexpected way. Sarah and I were walking through a park, sipping on iced coffees and chatting about everything and nothing. She suddenly stopped, turned to me, and said, "You seem lighter lately, like you're finally letting go." I thought about her words, about how far I'd come since that night in David's car, about how much stronger I felt now. "I think you're right," I said. "For the first time, I'm not carrying her with me anymore." We kept walking, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the path. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt truly free. Life continued to shift in ways I hadn't expected. Each day brought small victories, moments where I realized just how much I'd reclaimed from the wreckage of my marriage. I'd thought it would take years to feel normal again, but in many ways, I already felt better than I ever had during my time with Hannah. Sarah had a lot to do with that. Our coffee dates turned into dinners, then into casual outings that felt less like friends catching up and more like something more. It wasn't anything we labeled, and I wasn't in a rush to define it. We both carried our own histories, our own scars, and the last thing I wanted was to bring old baggage into something new. But for the first time in a long time, I felt excited about the possibilities. One evening, we went to an outdoor concert. The air was crisp, and the park was packed with people swaying to the music. I hadn't been to a concert in years, and for a moment, I hesitated. What if it felt too much like something I would have done with Hannah? What if it dredged up old memories? But Sarah must have seen something in my face because she grabbed my hand and pulled me into the crowd. "Come on," she said, her smile infectious. "You need to loosen up." And for the next 2 hours, I did. We danced, laughed, and sang along to songs we barely knew. It was the kind of carefree, joyous experience I hadn't allowed myself in years. As the final song played and the crowd erupted into applause, I realized something. I wasn't thinking about Hannah, not even a little. Later that night, as we walked back to our cars, Sarah turned to me. "You're different now," she said. "Lighter." "I feel lighter," I admitted. "For the first time in a long time, I feel happy." Her smile was warm, and for a moment, we just stood there, the sounds of the city fading into the background. "You deserve that," she said softly, and for the first time, I believed her. Just when I thought I was finally free of Hannah's shadow, she found a way to rear her head again. It came in the form of a phone call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hannah's pregnant," a voice blurted out on the other end. It was David. "What?" I asked, stunned. "She told me last week. She says it's mine, but I'm not sure if I believe her," he continued, his voice frantic. "I thought you should know. She's been acting off." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. "Why are you telling me this?" I demanded. "Because I don't know what to do," David said. "She keeps talking about wanting to fix things with me, but, man, I can't. I don't even know if the baby's mine." I hung up without another word, my hands shaking. Hannah's chaos, it seemed, had no end. But this time, it wasn't my burden to bear. That night, I sat down and thought about what David's call meant. It would have been easy to let it pull me back into the mess, to let it reopen old wounds. But I refused. Whatever was happening in Hannah's life was no longer my concern. I had built a wall between us, and I wasn't about to tear it down. I texted Sarah that night, asking if she wanted to grab dinner the next day. She responded with a quick, enthusiastic yes. And just like that, I was reminded of the life I was building, one filled with joy, freedom, and possibilities. Hannah's chapter was closed, no matter how much she tried to claw her way back into my story. It was my story now, and I was finally ready to write the next page. David's call stayed with me for a few days, not because I cared what was happening with Hannah, but because it served as a stark reminder of how far I'd come. There was a time when her every decision controlled my emotions, my reactions, my sense of self-worth. Now, her chaos was just background noise, faint and irrelevant. I didn't call David back. I didn't reach out to Hannah. It wasn't my business anymore, and I refused to let her drag me back into her spiral. Instead, I focused on myself and on Sarah. Our casual meetups were becoming something more. We didn't label it, but it was undeniable. She had a way of grounding me, of reminding me that life wasn't just something to endure but something to embrace. One evening, after dinner at a cozy Italian place she loved, she looked at me and said, "You're not the same guy I ran into at the grocery store." "Good different or bad different?" I teased. "Good," she said, her smile soft. "You've let go of the weight you were carrying. I can see it." And she was right. I felt lighter, freer, more in control of my life than I had in years. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. A final twist as I was settling into this new normal. The universe decided to throw one last curveball my way. One afternoon, as I was walking back to my car after work, I saw her. Hannah. She was standing near my car, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I considered turning around and walking the other way, but something in her posture stopped me. She didn't look angry or smug. She looked defeated. "What do you want, Hannah?" I asked when I finally approached. She hesitated, then said, "I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "You've said that before." "I know," she said quickly, "but I mean it this time. I've messed everything up. With you, with David, with my life. And I just I wanted you to know that I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to be better." Her words hung in the air. Once, they would have broken me. Once, I would have clung to them, hoping they were a sign she'd finally changed. But now, they felt like the closing of a door I'd already walked through. "I appreciate the apology," I said, my voice steady. "But it doesn't change anything. I've moved on, Hannah. I hope you can too." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm really happy for you," she said softly. "You deserve to be happy." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for what could have been, but relief that I was no longer trapped in the web of her lies and manipulations. That night, I told Sarah about the encounter. She listened quietly, then asked, "How do you feel about it?" "Free," I said without hesitation. "It's like I finally have closure." She smiled, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Then it's time to focus on what's next." And for the first time in a long time, I was ready. Ready to build a life that was mine alone, filled with the kind of love and happiness I'd once thought was out of reach. Hannah was my past, but Sarah felt like the beginning of something new. After my final encounter with Hannah, I felt a shift inside me. It was as if a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. The apology didn't erase the pain she caused, but it was enough for me to finally put everything to rest. There was nothing left to untangle, no unfinished business or lingering questions. I was free. With that freedom came a sense of clarity. For months, I'd been rebuilding my life piece by piece, but now I realized I wanted more than just a patchwork of who I used to be. I wanted something new, something whole, and I wanted Sarah to be a part of it. Our relationship, if you could even call it that yet, had grown slowly and organically. There were no grand gestures, no declarations of love, just two people finding comfort and joy in each other's company. It was refreshing, especially after the chaos of my marriage. One evening, while we were sitting on her couch watching a movie, I turned to her and said, "Do you ever think about what's next for us?" She paused, her eyes searching mine. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I didn't want to rush you. You've been through so much." "I think I'm ready," I said, surprising even myself with the certainty in my voice. "For whatever this is. For us." Her smile was small but radiant. "Me too." From that moment, things shifted. We stopped tiptoeing around our feelings, stopped pretending this wasn't turning into something serious. We started making plans, not big ones, not yet, but little things. Weekend trips, dinner with her friends, a photography exhibit she knew I'd love. It wasn't perfect. I still had moments of doubt, moments when the scars from my marriage made me question if I was capable of building something new. But Sarah was patient. She didn't try to fix me or rush me. She just stood by my side, reminding me in her quiet way that I wasn't alone. Of course, the past has a way of creeping up when you least expect it. A mutual friend sent me a message one day. A photo of Hannah, pregnant and beaming, standing next to David. The caption read, "Starting fresh." I stared at the photo for a long time, waiting for the familiar pang of hurt or anger. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger's life. Whatever she and David were building was no longer my concern. I hoped, for their sake, that it worked out. When I showed the photo to Sarah, she raised an eyebrow. "Do you think she's really changed?" "Honestly," I said, "I don't know, but it doesn't matter. I have." Sarah leaned over and kissed my cheek. "Good answer." With Hannah firmly in the rearview mirror, I started to focus more on the life I was building with Sarah. We weren't in a rush, but we weren't holding back either. Every step we took felt intentional, deliberate, and full of possibility. One weekend, while hiking a trail just outside the city, she stopped me mid-step and pointed to a clearing. "What do you see?" she asked. I looked around, confused. "Trees." She laughed. "I mean, what do you feel? When you think about us, about the future, What do you feel? I thought about it for a moment, the cool breeze brushing against my skin, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. I feel peace, I said finally, and hope. Her smile widened. Me too. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it didn't need to be. In that quiet clearing, surrounded by nothing but nature and possibility, I realized that I didn't just want to move on. I wanted to move forward, with her. The past had shaped me, scarred me, and taught me more than I ever wanted to learn. But it no longer defined me. I was ready to embrace the future, not as a man broken by betrayal, but as someone who had found strength in the pieces. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly where I was going. The journey of rebuilding my life wasn't a straight path. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when the echoes of Hannah's betrayal or the chaos of the divorce would sneak into my thoughts. But those moments grew fewer and farther between. Each day, the present felt more vivid, the future more promising. Sarah became an anchor for me, not in the sense of holding me down, but grounding me. She had this way of balancing warmth and independence, of showing me that love didn't have to be a cage. With her, I felt free to be myself, flaws and all. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove my worth to someone. I just was. One night, over dinner at her place, she said something that stuck with me. You know, healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about learning to carry it differently. I thought about that for a long time. I wasn't trying to erase Hannah from my life anymore. She was a chapter in my story, a pivotal one that had shaped who I was. But she didn't get to write the rest of the book. That was my job now. Sarah and I started making bigger plans. A weekend trip turned into a week-long vacation to the coast, where we spent our days hiking cliffs and our nights talking about everything from childhood dreams to the quirks that made us laugh. It was on that trip that I realized I wasn't just happy, I was content. When we returned, I made a decision. I put the house, the one I'd shared with Hannah, on the market. It wasn't an easy choice. That house had been my home, a place where I'd built so many memories. But it also held too much baggage, too many ghosts. I wanted a fresh start, a space that was entirely my own. Sarah helped me find a new place, a small but charming apartment with lots of natural light and a balcony that overlooked the city. Moving in felt symbolic, like shedding the last remnants of a life I no longer belonged to. I even started decorating, something I'd never cared much about before. Each piece of furniture, each framed photo, felt like a statement. This is who I am now. Just as I was settling into my new life, Hannah made one last attempt to pull me back into hers. It came in the form of a letter, mailed to my new address. She must have gotten it from a mutual friend, though I had no idea who. The letter was brief, almost curt. She wrote that she wanted to apologize again and hoped we could be friends someday. She mentioned the baby she'd had with David and how motherhood was teaching her to be a better person. She ended with a vague offer to catch up if I was ever willing. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't feel much of anything about her. She was a part of my past, but she had no place in my future. Life with Sarah continued to grow. We weren't rushing into anything, but we were intentional. Every step felt natural. Every moment shared felt genuine. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the city lights twinkle, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever regret what you went through?" I thought about it for a moment, the weight of her question settling over me. I used to, I admitted. But now? No. It taught me what I don't want, what I won't settle for. And it showed me what real love looks like. She smiled, her hand finding mine. I think you're pretty incredible. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think.